The Krell Dominion had been conquering worlds for over 3,000 years. 47 star systems had fallen under their control, and not once had they ever felt afraid. Fear was simply not part of their existence. Their home planet was a perfect paradise where nothing could challenge them. No predators hunted them. No diseases threatened them. They had always been the strongest, the smartest, the best. When they finally built ships and traveled to the stars, they expected the universe to bow before them just like everything else always had. And it did, every single time. Some species surrendered the moment Krell ships appeared in their skies. Others tried to negotiate, offering tribute and resources in exchange for their lives. A few fought back, but their resistance never lasted long. The Krell were simply too advanced, too powerful, too organized. Within weeks, or sometimes days, new worlds would join the Dominion. It became routine, almost boring. The Krell military had perfected the process of conquest down to a precise science. Commander Threx had personally overseen the subjugation of 12 different civilizations. He was considered one of the Dominion's finest military leaders. His war fleet, called the Talon of Eternity, was the pride of the Krell Navy. 300 warships, each one capable of destroying a city from orbit. Thousands of soldiers trained from birth in the art of warfare. Weapons that could crack planets open if needed. When Threx and his fleet arrived at a new star system, the outcome was never in doubt. So when the Dominion's exploration drones detected a primitive civilization in a system the locals called Sol, Threx volunteered to handle the acquisition personally. The initial reports made it sound almost too easy. The inhabitants of the third planet from the star had barely left their own world. A few small stations orbited their planet and its moon. Some basic probes had reached the nearby planets. Their ships still used chemical rockets, technology the Krell had abandoned thousands of years ago. Even more promising, the planet was divided into dozens of separate nations, each with its own government and military. They fought among themselves constantly over resources, territory, and ancient grudges. Perfect conditions for a quick takeover. Threx expected to be done within a week. The Talon of Eternity entered the Sol system on a bright Tuesday morning. Though Threx had no concept of human timekeeping, his fleet positioned itself near the fourth planet, the red one the humans called Mars. Sensors detected several small human colonies on the planet's surface and a mining station in orbit. This station would serve as the demonstration target. Threx followed the standard protocol that had worked on every other world. First, show overwhelming power. Make them understand that resistance is pointless. Then, offer terms. Surrender peacefully and join the Dominion as a client species, or face complete destruction. Most civilizations chose survival. The smart ones always did. He gave the order, and one of his battlecruisers fired a single plasma beam at the mining station. The structure, which had taken humans 5 years and billions of dollars to build, vanished in a flash of superheated gas and metal. Debris scattered across Mars' orbit, glowing red as it burned up in the thin atmosphere below. Now came the waiting. Usually within an hour, sometimes within minutes, the surrender messages would start flooding in. Panic leaders begging for mercy. Offers of tribute. Promises of cooperation. Threx had heard it all before in a dozen different languages from a dozen different species. But an hour passed and no surrender came. Instead, something else happened. The communications officer, a young Krell named Velcris, suddenly looked up from her station with confusion written across her face. Her scanning equipment was being overwhelmed with signals from the third planet. "Sir," she said, her voice uncertain, "I'm intercepting thousands of transmissions from a planet below. They're broadcasting on every frequency." Finally, Threx said, "Put the surrender message through." "Sir, these aren't surrender messages." Threx felt a flicker of annoyance. What are they then? Pleas for mercy? Offers of tribute? Velcris worked her controls, translating the signals into a format Threx could understand. As the words appeared on his screen, his annoyance transformed into something else entirely. Something he had never felt before. The transmissions were military orders. Every nation on the planet, despite their differences and conflicts, was issuing the same type of commands. Military reserves being activated. Weapons factories switching to wartime production. naval vessels returning to port for combat modifications, ground forces moving to defensive positions, civilian populations being evacuated from major cities, resource rationing being implemented. They're mobilizing for war, Velcris whispered. All of them. Every nation on the planet. Threx stared at the data streaming across his displays. This made no sense. The humans had seen what Krell weapons could do. They knew they were outmatched in every possible way. Their technology was primitive. Their military forces were divided and scattered. They stood no chance whatsoever. And yet they were preparing to fight. More transmissions came through. These were being broadcast publicly, meant for civilian populations. Human leaders were making speeches, their words translated by the Krell computers. The speeches didn't beg for peace or call for calm. Instead, they spoke of resistance and defiance. They called their people to action. They promised that humanity would never bow to alien conquerors, no matter the cost. One transmission, in particular, caught Threx's attention. A human military leader named General Patrick Hayes was addressing his forces. They think we'll surrender because they destroyed one station, Hayes said, his voice hard and determined. They think one demonstration of power will make us afraid. They don't understand us at all. Humanity doesn't kneel. We never have, and we never will. So let's show these aliens what happens when they pick a fight with Earth. The transmission ended with thousands of human soldiers cheering. Threx sat in his command chair, processing what he was witnessing. In his entire military career spanning over 6 decades, he had never seen anything like this. Every other species had shown fear when confronted with Krell power. They understood the mathematics of survival. They chose to live under Dominion rule, rather than die in pointless resistance. But these humans seemed to have chosen death over submission before the fight had even begun. For the first time in his long life, Commander Threx felt something unfamiliar settle deep in his chest. It was a cold, uncomfortable feeling that made his breathing shallow and his heart beat faster. He didn't have a name for this sensation. His language didn't even have a word for it. But the humans did. They called it uncertainty. And underneath that uncertainty lurked something even more profound, something that would only grow stronger in the days and weeks to come. They called it fear. 3 months had passed since the Krell occupied humanity's colonies on the Moon and Mars. Commander Threx had expected organized resistance to collapse within weeks, maybe a month at most. That's how it always went. Initial defiance would fade as the reality of Krell military superiority became undeniable. Leaders would emerge seeking terms. Populations would accept the new order. Peace, however uncomfortable, would settle in. But that's not what happened with the humans. Instead, something far more troubling was occurring. The human fighters weren't getting discouraged or surrendering. They were learning. Every tactic the Krell used successfully in one battle would somehow be countered in the next. Their plasma weapons, which had cut through enemy defenses on dozens of worlds, suddenly faced specialized shielding that shouldn't have existed. Their troop movements, carefully planned and executed, kept walking into ambushes as if the humans knew exactly where they'd be. Their supply lines, which should have been secure, were being hit with disturbing regularity. The worst incident happened at Supply Station 17, a fortified depot on the lunar surface that stored ammunition, food, and medical supplies for 3 Krell battalions. The facility was protected by 200 soldiers, automated defense turrets, sensor arrays that could detect movement from kilometers away, and walls thick enough to withstand direct missile strikes. It should have been completely safe. Lieutenant Jake Morrison didn't care about should have been. Morrison was 28 years old, a former Marine who'd been fighting the Krell since the first day of the invasion. He'd lost his parents when the Krell bombarded Chicago, lost his sister during the evacuation of Luna Station 3, and lost most of his original unit in the bloody fighting around the Mars colonies. What he hadn't lost was his ability to think creatively and his absolute refusal to give up. He studied the supply depot for 2 weeks, watching Krell patrol patterns, monitoring their communications, and noting every detail about how they operated. Then he'd picked 11 soldiers for his team, just 12 humans total, against 200 Krell. The odds were insane, and Morrison knew it. But he'd learned something important about the Krell over these 3 months. They were predictable. They followed their training exactly, never deviating, never improvising. They couldn't imagine anyone being crazy enough to attack a fortified position with such a small force. Morrison was counting on that. His team approached the depot during a scheduled maintenance window when external sensors were temporarily reduced. They didn't try to breach the walls or attack the main entrance. Instead, Morrison led them to the facility's oxygen recycling plant, a structure built partially outside the main defensive perimeter because no one expected it to be a target. After all, who attacks a life support system? Someone who understands that in space, oxygen is a weapon. Morrison's team quietly cut to the plant's outer hull, accessed the control systems, and reprogrammed them. Then they set charges on the main power conduits and waited. When the Krell shift change began, exactly on schedule like always, Morrison triggered the sequence. First, the oxygen levels throughout the facility suddenly spiked to dangerous levels. Not enough to be immediately lethal, but enough to make everyone dizzy and confused. The Krell soldiers, suddenly unable to think clearly, tried to figure out what was happening. That's when Morrison's charges blew the power conduits. Lights went out. Life support alarms screamed. Emergency protocols activated, sealing different sections of the facility. The Krell troops, trained for combat but not for this kind of chaos, scrambled to their emergency stations following their standard procedures, which was exactly what Morrison wanted them to do. While the Krell dealt with what they thought was a critical systems failure, Morrison's team entered through the compromised oxygen plant. They moved through the confused facility, avoiding the main troop concentrations, and headed straight for the intelligence center. There, they downloaded classified data about Krell fleet movements, supply schedules, and communication protocols. Information that would save countless human lives in the battles to come. The Krell finally realized they were under attack, but by then Morrison's team was already leaving. As they escaped, they triggered a secondary set of charges that collapsed part of the facility's structure. 47 Krell soldiers died in the collapse and the chaos that followed. Morrison lost 3 of his people during the escape, cut down by Krell fire as they made their final sprint to the extraction point. 9 humans made it back. The intelligence they carried was priceless. When Commander Threx reviewed the battle footage, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. The humans had attacked with a force 20 times smaller than the garrison. They'd used the facility's own systems against it. They'd struck during what should have been the most secure moment of the day. They'd achieved their objective and escaped despite overwhelming opposition. How did they know our reinforcement schedule? Threx demanded, his voice tight with frustration. How did they bypass our sensors? How did they know exactly when and where to strike? None of his officers had good answers. The humans shouldn't have been capable of this. Their technology was inferior. Their numbers were limited. They were cut off from their homeworld, surrounded, outnumbered. By every logical calculation, they should be losing badly. But they weren't losing. If anything, they were getting more dangerous. Junior Officer Velcris had been spending her off-duty hours studying captured human data cores. She'd become fascinated by human history, trying to understand what made them so different from every other species the Krell had conquered. What she found disturbed her deeply. "Commander," she said during the next strategy meeting, "I need to show you something about human evolution." She brought up images on the main display, pictures of Earth from millions of years ago. A world that looked nothing like the peaceful paradise the Krell had evolved on. Earth was filled with massive predators. Giant cats with teeth like daggers. Enormous bears that could kill with a single swipe. Venomous snakes and spiders. Crocodiles that lurked in rivers. Sharks that hunted in oceans. Environmental extremes that range from burning deserts to frozen wastelands. The destruction of Commander Threx's flagship sent shockwaves through the Krell Dominion, not because of the military loss, though that was significant, but because of what it represented. A primitive species had just demonstrated they would rather die than surrender. The Dominion Council, meeting in their grand chamber on the Krell homeworld, made a decision. If the humans wanted total war, they would get it. The Grand Fleet was assembled. 300 warships, the largest military force the Krell had ever deployed against a single target. These weren't the standard patrol vessels that had initially invaded the Sol system. These were dreadnoughts and battlecruisers that had crushed the Viridian Empire, a civilization far more advanced than humanity. These same ships had subjugated the Crescent Worlds, forcing 12 different species to bow before Krell power. The Grand Fleet had never failed, not once in 200 years of service. The Dominion was certain this overwhelming display of force would finally break human resistance. No rational species could look at 300 warships and choose to continue fighting. Surely the humans would see reason now. They didn't understand humans at all. When news reached Earth that the Grand Fleet was coming, something remarkable happened. Something the Krell had never witnessed in all their conquests. Humanity's response wasn't panic or despair. It was unity. Every major nation on Earth, countries that had been enemies for generations, put aside their differences completely. The entire planet transformed into a war machine. Automobile factories stopped making cars and started building tanks. Electronics manufacturers began producing targeting systems and communication equipment. Civilian shipyards that once built cruise ships now constructed warships around the clock. Even toy factories were repurposed to make components for weapon systems. Admiral Thomas Crawford, a veteran naval officer who'd spent 30 years preparing for conflicts that never came, now found himself commanding humanity's defense from the bridge of the UES Constellation. This massive carrier, humanity's first purpose-built warship of its kind, had been completed in just 8 weeks. It would have been impossible before the war. But humans had learned to do impossible things when survival was at stake. Crawford coordinated defense efforts across the entire Sol system. Ships from America, China, Russia, India, Brazil, and dozens of other nations all answered his command. There were no arguments about jurisdiction or national pride. Everyone understood what was coming. Junior Officer Velcris, monitoring human communications from her station aboard a Krell intelligence vessel, couldn't believe what she was seeing. She was reviewing a broadcast from Earth, something the humans called a war bond advertisement. It showed young children, some no older than 6 or 7 years, lining up to donate their allowance money to help build warships. Save your coins. Save your world. The advertisement said cheerfully, showing a little girl dropping money into a collection box. Every dollar helps build the ships our soldiers need to protect Earth. Velcris immediately transmitted this information to the Dominion Council. The council members, watching the footage in their chamber, sat in stunned silence. Children, their young were volunteering resources for war, not being forced, not being coerced, volunteering. This level of societal commitment is unprecedented. One council member said quietly, "No species we've encountered has ever mobilized their entire population like this." Another council member pulled up casualty statistics. Human military losses have exceeded 12% of their total forces. Historically, species surrender when they reach 5%. The humans should have given up months ago. But human resistance wasn't decreasing. It was intensifying. On the moon, in the territories occupied by Krell forces, Lieutenant Colonel Danny Reed was making the occupation as costly as possible. Reed had grown up in rural Montana, where his grandfather taught him to hunt. Those lessons about patience, terrain, and knowing your enemy were serving him well now. Reed's forces never engaged in direct combat with Krell patrols. They couldn't win those fights. Instead, they made every day of occupation a nightmare for the Krell soldiers. Supply convoys traveling between bases would disappear without a trace. One day a truck full of ammunition would just vanish, its Krell drivers never seen again. Communications arrays would explode at random times, always when they were most needed. Water purification systems would malfunction, contaminating supplies. Power generators would mysteriously fail. The Krell soldiers stationed on the moon began to crack under pressure. They stopped trusting their equipment. They stopped trusting their intelligence reports. They started seeing threats everywhere, jumping at shadows, firing at nothing. Some refused to leave their bases, except in large groups. Paranoia spread through their ranks like a disease. One Krell patrol discovered a human facility that looked abandoned. They approached carefully, scanning for threats. Their sensors showed nothing dangerous. They entered the building to search for intelligence. As soon as they stepped inside, the entire structure collapsed. The humans had rigged it to fall, sacrificing a potentially valuable strategic position just to kill 20 Krell soldiers. When Threx reviewed that incident report, he couldn't understand the logic. The humans had given up a facility that could have been defended, that had value, just to eliminate a small enemy patrol. The mathematics made no sense from a military standpoint. You don't sacrifice assets to achieve minimal tactical gains. But Velcris was beginning to understand. During a strategy session, she voiced her growing realization. Commander, they're not fighting for territory or tactical advantage. They're fighting to make us afraid, to make every victory cost us blood, to make us question whether conquering them is worth the price. Threx had noticed something else equally disturbing in the intelligence reports. Humans were using a tactic they called false surrender. Small groups of soldiers would signal that they wanted to give up, waving white flags and putting down their weapons. Krell forces, following standard protocols for accepting surrender, would approach to take them prisoner. Then the humans would detonate explosives they concealed on their bodies. The Krell soldiers and surrendering humans would all die together in the blast. Both sides lost people. But the humans seem to consider this an acceptable trade. What kind of species does that? What kind of people value hurting their enemy more than preserving their own lives? Threx struggled to comprehend this mindset. The Krell fought to win. They valued victory and survival. But humans seemed to fight just to make their enemies suffer, even if it meant dying in the process. Then Threx remembered what Velcris had said about human evolution. They evolved as both predator and prey. They learned that when a predator attacks you, the best defense isn't to run away. It's to fight back so viciously that the predator decides you're not worth the trouble and goes to find easier prey. That's exactly what humans were doing now, making themselves as difficult and costly as possible to conquer. They were willing to lose every battle as long as each battle cost the Krell dearly. The implications terrified Threx, because this strategy, as insane as it seemed, was actually working. Across Krell-controlled space, other species were watching. The Dominion ruled over 47 different star systems, controlling dozens of client species who'd surrendered long ago. These species had accepted Krell dominance because resistance seemed pointless. But now they were seeing something new. They were watching humans fight back, watching a primitive species with inferior technology inflict serious damage on the mighty Krell Dominion, watching humans refuse to surrender despite impossible odds. For the first time in generations, these conquered species began asking themselves a dangerous question. What if we said no? What if we fought back like the humans are fighting back? Small acts of resistance began appearing across the Dominion. Nothing major at first. Just workers moving slower than required. Small acts of sabotage. Missing supplies. Equipment breaking down more often than it should. The kind of things that could be blamed on accidents. But Threx recognized these signs. He'd seen them on Earth, in the early days of the occupation. This was how resistance movements started. And the humans, without even meaning to, had just shown every conquered species in the Dominion that the Krell could be hurt. The foundations of an empire built on fear and overwhelming force were beginning to crack. And the Krell, for all their military might, had no idea how to stop it. Because you can't intimidate someone who's already decided they'd rather die than submit. And the humans had made that decision on day one. The war had been raging for 8 months when Dr. Emily Carter stood before a room full of the world's most powerful leaders. Carter was a physicist who'd spent her entire career studying theoretical propulsion systems, work that most people considered interesting but impractical. Now her theories were about to change the course of human history. Project Vindication had started as a desperate idea during the darkest days of the war. If humanity couldn't match Krell technology ship to ship, maybe they could use physics itself as a weapon. Carter's team had been working around the clock for months, turning an impossible concept into reality. We can't stop their ships in direct combat, Carter explained, displaying complex calculations on the screens around the room. But we can do something they won't expect. We can turn asteroids into weapons. Not just any weapons, relativistic kinetic missiles. The concept was terrifyingly simple. Take an asteroid, attach massive engines to it, and accelerate it to a significant fraction of light speed. At those velocities, even a small rock becomes more destructive than any nuclear weapon. The kinetic energy alone would be devastating. And once launched, nothing could stop it. No shield, no weapon, no defensive system could intercept something moving that fast. There was just one problem. The missiles would take 9 months to reach their targets. 9 months during which the war would continue. 9 months during which humanity might lose everything. President James Mitchell sat in silence for a long moment after Carter finished her presentation. He was a former teacher who'd never wanted to be a wartime president. But the Krell invasion had forced him into impossible decisions, and this was the most impossible one yet. If they want to take our home, Carter said quietly, they need to learn what it means to fear for theirs. Mitchell looked around the room at the faces of other world leaders joining the meeting virtually, representatives from every major nation on Earth. All of them nodded. The decision was unanimous. Launch the missiles, Mitchell said. His voice was heavy with the weight of what he'd just authorized. 12 asteroids, carefully selected and positioned over months of preparation, fired their engines. They accelerated away from the Sol system, their trajectories calculated with perfect precision. Their targets were military installations on the Krell homeworld, coordinates obtained from capture intelligence data. Humanity was taking the war to the enemy's doorstep. The Krell detected the launches immediately. Their long-range sensors tracked the asteroids as they accelerated, but the Krell commanders were confused by what they were seeing. Yes, the asteroids were moving fast and getting faster, but they would take 9 months to reach Krell space. 9 months was an eternity in warfare. Surely the war would be over long before these primitive weapons arrived. Surely this was just a desperate gesture from a dying civilization. They were wrong about everything. 9 months passed. The war didn't end. If anything, human resistance grew fiercer. The Krell Grand Fleet had been ground down through constant skirmishes, ambushes, and suicide attacks. Every week brought new losses. Every battle cost more than the last. But the Krell kept fighting, certain that victory was inevitable. Then the first kinetic projectile arrived. The target was the Krell Military Academy, the most prestigious training facility in the Dominion. Thousands of young Krell officers studied there, learning the tactics and strategies that had conquered dozens of worlds. The academy was located on the Krell homeworld, surrounded by defensive shields and protected by orbital weapons platforms. It was supposed to be one of the safest places in Krell space. The asteroid hit at 40% of light speed. The defensive shields might as well have been made of paper. The orbital platforms never had time to fire. The entire facility simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a flash of energy that was visible from orbit. The explosion carved a crater 3 kilometers wide. 5,000 Krell died instantly, along with the accumulated knowledge of centuries. 3 more strikes followed over the next 6 hours. A naval shipyard vanished. A command center evaporated. A weapons research facility was reduced to molten rock. Each target had been chosen carefully. Each strike sent the same message. Nowhere is safe. We can reach you anywhere. For the first time in 5,000 years of Krell history, their homeworld was under attack. Their paradise world, which had never known war or fear, suddenly understood both. Panic spread through Krell society. Citizens who'd always felt secure now looked at the sky with terror, wondering if death was falling toward them at relativistic speeds. The government tried to calm the population, but how do you calm people who just learned their entire worldview was wrong? The Krell had always believed they were untouchable. That belief had just been shattered. Commander Threx received emergency orders from the Dominion Council. Capture a high-ranking human officer. They needed to understand how humanity thought, how they'd managed to accomplish this, what they were planning next. The Krell were fighting an enemy they didn't understand at all. Threx's forces laid a trap for the UES Yorktown, a human cruiser operating near Jupiter. The ambush was perfectly executed. The Yorktown's captain tried to fight free, but the odds were overwhelming. The ship was captured, and its senior officers were taken prisoner. Among them was Admiral Robert Hayes. The name made Threx pause. Hayes, like the captain who'd rammed her ship into his flagship. He checked the records. Yes, they were siblings. Brother and sister, both willing to die fighting the Krell. Threx had Hayes brought to an interrogation chamber. No torture, no threats. Just two military officers talking. Threx needed answers more than he needed revenge. "Why do you continue fighting?" Threx asked, genuinely confused. "We can still destroy your world. Our fleet is larger. Our technology is superior. Yet you struck our homeworld, guaranteeing we'll never show mercy now. You condemned your entire species to extinction. Why?" Hayes looked at him with something that might have been pity. "You don't understand us at all, do you?" "Explain it to me," Threx said. "Make me understand." Hayes leaned forward. "We evolved on a world where everything wanted to eat us. Lions, bears, snakes, spiders, crocodiles, even microscopic organisms that could kill us with disease. For millions of years, we were prey. We survived by learning one critical lesson. When something tries to eat you, you make it hurt. You make it bleed. You make it remember that attacking you was the worst decision it ever made. That's just evolution. Ancient history." "No," Hayes said firmly. "It's who we are. You Krell evolved on a paradise where nothing threatened you. You never learned fear, so you never learned restraint. You never learned that some prey bites back hard enough that the predator walks away. We learned that lesson in our bones. We don't need to win this war. Commander, we just need to make you regret starting it." "That's madness," Threx whispered. "That's survival," Hayes corrected. "Your species sees fear as weakness. We see it as information. We've been afraid since the first human ancestor looked into the dark and wondered what was looking back. That fear made us cautious. It made us creative. It made us build walls and weapons and civilizations. And it made us absolutely determined never to be prey again, never to bow, never to surrender." Threx returned to his command ship with Hayes' words echoing in his mind. He pulled up the casualty reports and strategic projections. The numbers told a devastating story. The Krell would probably win the war eventually. But at what cost? Half the Grand Fleet was gone. Thousands of soldiers dead. The homeworld damaged and terrified. And across the Dominion, 17 client species had declared independence, inspired by human resistance. Those species were now fighting their own wars of liberation. The Krell couldn't put down all these rebellions while also fighting humanity. Velcris found him staring at the data. "We're winning every battle," she said quietly, "but we're losing the war." Threx nodded slowly. The Dominion faced extinction, not from military defeat, but from something worse. They'd proven that their control could be challenged. They'd shown every conquered species that resistance was possible. The Empire was crumbling from within. 3 days later, the Krell Council voted to open negotiations with humanity. The vote was close, and many council members were furious at the decision, but the numbers didn't lie. Continuing the war would destroy the Dominion, even if they won. Threx received orders to arrange the first meeting. The humans chose a location, Titan, Saturn's largest moon, the place where Captain Rebecca Hayes had rammed her ship into the Krell flagship, the place where she and 800 of her crew had died. The message was clear. We remember our dead, and we'll make you remember them too. The prefabricated habitat on Titan had been built specifically for this moment. Its transparent walls looked out over a landscape that would haunt Commander Threx for the rest of his life. There, less than a kilometer away, was a crater where the human destroyer Defiant had crashed into his flagship 9 months ago. The impact site had been preserved exactly as it was. Twisted metal, scorched rock, a grave for 800 humans who chose death over defeat. The location for the treaty signing wasn't chosen randomly. Nothing humans did was random. Threx had learned. They wanted him to see that crater, to remember, to understand that every word in this treaty was written in blood. Threx's military career was over. He knew that in the Krell Dominion. Defeat had many fathers, but someone had to take the blame. He was the most convenient scapegoat, the commander who promised an easy conquest and delivered a catastrophe instead. After today, he'd be stripped of rank and sent into quiet retirement. If he was lucky, Ambassador Jennifer Cole led the human delegation. Threx had studied her file obsessively over the past week, trying to understand the person he'd be negotiating with. She was only 30 years old, young even by human standards. Before the war, she'd been a trade negotiator, handling boring disputes about agricultural exports and shipping regulations. The kind of work that required patience and attention to detail, but nothing dramatic. Then the Krell invaded. Her husband died in the first wave of attacks on the moon colonies. Her older brother was killed defending Mars. Her younger brother went down with his ship during the Battle of Europa. The war had taken everything from her, except her life and her determination. Now she sat across from Threx, her face calm and professional, reading from the treaty document. "Sovereignty for Earth and all Sol System territories," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Immediate withdrawal of all Krell military forces. Reparations to be paid in technology transfers and raw materials over a period of 10 standard years. Establishment of a neutral zone between Krell and human space, monitored by independent observers." Threx had expected all of this. These were the normal terms of defeat. Humiliating but survivable. The Dominion would withdraw, lick its wounds, and rebuild. In a few generations, this embarrassment will be forgotten. Then Cole reached Article 7. Any species currently within the Krell Dominion may formally request independence, which will be granted within 1 standard year. The Krell Dominion agrees not to interfere with, retaliate against, or impede any species choosing independence. Violations of this article will be considered an act of war against humanity and its allies. Threx felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Article 7 will destroy us," he said quietly. "You know that." Cole looked at him without sympathy. "Yes." "Then why include it? You've won. You have your independence. Why tear down our entire civilization?" "Because you destroyed yourselves," Cole said, her voice hard. "You built an empire on the assumption that fear was weakness, that superior force was all that mattered. You never learned that some things fight back. We're just making sure every species in your empire knows they have a choice now, that they can say no. This is revenge." "No," Cole corrected. "Revenge would be us hunting down every Krell in the galaxy. This is justice. You took freedom from dozens of species. Now they get it back." The treaty was signed that afternoon. Threx's hand shook slightly as he applied his seal to the document. He knew he was watching the end of everything the Krell Dominion had built over thousands of years. He was right. Within the first week after the treaty was announced, 23 species formally requested independence. Not rebellions, not violent uprisings. Just formal declarations transmitted to the Dominion Council, citing Article 7 of the Treaty of Titan. By Krell law, they had to be honored. The second week brought 17 more requests. The third week brought 31. Within 6 months, the Dominion that had ruled 47 star systems controlled only 7. The Empire hadn't fallen through conquest. It had collapsed because everyone suddenly realized they didn't have to obey anymore. Threx remained on Titan for 3 days after the signing. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't look away. He watched human delegates meeting with representatives from the newly independent species. He expected threats or demands for tribute. Instead, he saw something that confused him deeply. The humans were offering help, technology exchanges, mutual defense pacts, trade agreements, educational programs. They were treating these former Krell subjects as equals and potential allies, not as conquered territories to exploit. "We didn't fight this war to build an empire," one human diplomat explained during a public statement. "We fought because someone tried to take our freedom. Now we're making sure no one can do that to anyone else." On his last day on Titan, General Danny Reed approached Threx at an observation window. Reed had been one of the guerrilla fighters who'd made the lunar occupation impossible. Now he wore a dress uniform with medals and carried 2 glasses filled with amber liquid. "Whiskey," Reed explained, offering 1 glass to Threx. "Old Earth tradition. When the war ends, you drink with your enemies. Helps remember you're both human." He paused. "Well, you know what I mean." Threx accepted the glass cautiously. The liquid burned his throat, but not unpleasantly. Your species was willing to die to the last individual, rather than submit. How do we negotiate with such madness? How do we coexist with people who value death over surrender? Reed sipped his whiskey slowly before answering. It's not madness, Commander. It's understanding. We grew up afraid. Afraid of the dark. Afraid of the things that hunted us. Afraid of each other. That fear taught us caution and creativity. But it also taught us that some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for. You, Krell, were the apex predator. Nothing ever threatened you, so you never learned fear. You never learned restraint. And now, Threx asked. Reed gestured toward Earth, visible as a blue dot through the window. Now the galaxy operates on a new principle. Not domination, mutual deterrence. Everyone knows that conquest costs too much. That's not the peace anyone wanted. But it's the peace we've got. And honestly, it's better than the alternative. Threx drank more of the whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through his body. My people believed strength was everything. That superior force was all that mattered. Strength matters, Reed agreed. But so does knowing when not to use it. We learned that lesson the hard way, fighting each other for thousands of years. You just learned it fighting us. The new galactic order took shape over the following years. The Krell Dominion, reduced to a fraction of its former size, survived but was no longer a threat. The newly independent species formed their own governments, some joining together in federations, others remaining separate. Humanity sat at the center of this new network, not as rulers, but as a species that had proven resistance was possible. Trade flourished. Technology was shared. Former enemies became cautious allies. The galaxy wasn't at peace, not really, but it was at equilibrium. Everyone understood the cost of aggression now. Before Threx left Titan for the last time, he visited the memorial plaque that humans had placed at the Defiance crash site. Captain Rebecca Hayes' name was engraved at the top, followed by the names of all 800 crew members who died with her. At the bottom was a simple inscription. They chose how their story ended. Threx stood there for a long time, understanding finally settling into his mind like pieces of a puzzle. The Krell had encountered something they'd never imagined existed, a species that valued freedom above survival, that chose defiance over victory, that would rather burn the galaxy than bow. In trying to conquer such a species, the Krell had learned the one lesson they'd never needed in 5,000 years of dominance. Some prey bite back so viciously that the predator walks away, not because the prey is stronger, but because the cost of winning is too high. Humans didn't defeat the Krell through superior technology or tactics. They defeated them through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat, through willingness to make every victory costly, every occupation impossible, every conquest Pyrrhic. They taught the fearless to fear. And in doing so, they changed the entire galaxy. As Threx's ship left Titan, he took one last look at that memorial plaque through his viewport. Captain Hayes and her crew had died 9 months ago, but their sacrifice had accomplished something no military victory could have. They'd proven that even the mightiest empire could be challenged, that freedom was worth any price. The Krell had been the apex predator for millennia. They'd conquered dozens of worlds without ever understanding fear or restraint. Then they met humanity and learned both lessons at once. Some species survived by being the strongest. Others survived by making themselves too dangerous to hunt. Humanity had chosen the second path, and in doing so, they'd rewritten the rules for the entire galaxy. Threx would spend the rest of his life wondering if things could have been different, if the Krell had approached humanity with respect instead of arrogance, if they'd offered partnership instead of subjugation. Would the outcome have changed? He'd never know, but he understood one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy was better for having humans in it, not because they were peaceful or kind, but because they'd proven that tyranny could be resisted, that the strong didn't always win, that freedom mattered more than survival, and sometimes that made all the difference.